My name is Glori Rivera, and I am the women's ministry leader here, and I serve as an elder's wife. And I'm so happy that you can join us as we study out the book of Esther. I'll be looking at Esther chapter 1 and 2 and just share a couple of takeaways. It's one of my favorite books in the Bible, and this is all leading up to our all women's worship service, our virtual women's service for such a time as this on March 7th. So please save the date, mark your calendars, and invite a friend, family, neighbor, and join us. So before we jump in, I did want to give a little bit of background into where this is set. And the events in the book of Esther happened during the reign of King Xerxes, who ruled from around 486 to 465 BC from India to Ethiopia. And we have a pretty clear picture of Xerxes from history. He inherited an empire from his father, King Darius, and he would refer to himself as the great king, king of kings, king of this great world, and he wanted to add Greece to his empire. And Xerxes brought his nobles and military leaders for a great banquet to plan this invasion, which would correspond with Esther chapter 1. It was not a successful attempt to conquer Greece. It did not go well with him, and that is very well documented. There's about a 4-year gap between Esther chapter 1 and Esther 2. The remaining years of King Xerxes' reign were mostly devoted to ambitious building projects and a life of indulgence. And he's remembered by history as a man of many appetites and a man given to irrational fits of rage, which you read throughout the book of Esther. In chapter 2, as I just said, a few years later, he's returning from defeat from the Greeks, and he's beginning to miss his wife Vashti. He forgot that he deposed her. And this is where his advisors give him the idea to choose virgins from throughout his kingdom. And here's where Esther, the main character of our story, comes into the story. And the events described in the book of Esther take place in the Persian capital of Susa, at a time where the first remnant of the exiled Jews under Zerubbabel, they're struggling to rebuild the nation of Judah. Esther's story fits between Ezra chapter 7 and 8 in the Bible, and you see God's sovereign design throughout. Through Esther's influence, Mordecai's leadership, God's people are saved from extinction. But let's just jump in to Esther chapter 1. And in verse 12, it says, "But Queen Vashti refused to come. And after this, she would no longer be queen." Sometimes we have to make hard decisions. We're thrust in a situation beyond our control, and we're faced with a choice. Do we do what's right? Do we do what's easiest? Do we do what's safe? Are we going to do what everyone expects us to do? Queen Vashti found herself in such a situation when she was asked to be paraded in front of the nobles who were all drunk, including her husband. It was a very difficult situation. Esther would face even greater pressure later on as you read the book. Over the years, Vashti has been portrayed as either a rebellious wife or as a woman of strong conviction for protecting her virtue and refusing to obey her drunken husband and the king's command. The fact is, the writer doesn't explain her motive. We can't say with certainty what Vashti's reasons were, because the text simply doesn't say. What we do see is that her decision did have long-term consequences. She would no longer be queen. She would be deposed. But so did King Xerxes when he responded in rage, when he turned to his advisors rather than talk to her. His advisors made a choice when they gave the advice that they did in chapter 1. We make decisions every day, some more important than others, and we don't always see the consequences of our decisions ahead of time. Vashti, King Xerxes, they were not worshipers of the God of the Jews. They did not see the far-reaching consequences of their choices. As children of God, we have this advantage in making decisions that we obey, we follow a God who knows, who's in control, which is one of my takeaways from chapter 1, that we follow a God who's in control no matter what may be happening. There's always a greater picture. You know, the scriptures teach us that there is such a thing as wisdom. Proverbs talks about prudence and wisdom. We have the scripture, Psalm 119, verse 9 to 11. We can pray for wisdom and God will give it to us. You know, in John 14, verses 16 and 17, we have God's Holy Spirit. Proverbs 13:20, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, the company we keep does matter. We will see how choices play out as well as how the main characters in the book of Esther seek and follow advice throughout the book. It's going to come back. Let's go to Esther chapter 2. We read about countless beautiful young women brought into the palace for an elaborate year-long celebration, preparation, only to spend one night with the king. In the morning, they'll return to the harem, destined to live out their days in loneliness and luxury, but in loneliness. You know, when I read this, my eyebrow is up to here, and I'm thinking, you know, it's years and years ago. It's a different culture. It's just different, and it's heartbreaking as I think about that. All these women, and wow, you know, it makes me sad. Esther was a Jewish orphan who was raised by her cousin Mordecai, and some people have, historians fault Mordecai for allowing Esther, a Jewess, to be taken into a pagan king's harem. But there's nothing to indicate that either one had a choice in this matter. And we know that Mordecai loved his niece as his own, and that she loved and respected him. And even when she became queen, you read later on how she would follow his counsel. And you know, throughout this chapter, what I see, one of my major takeaways, is that God is always at work, and that God is sovereign even when life does not make sense, which are major themes in the book. In Esther 2, verse 15, Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. Esther was beautiful with a character to match. This phrase, obtain favor, that's so described everyone who came in contact with her would seem. You see God's providence in her life. You would see it in chapter 2, verse 9, verse 15, verse 17. You know, not bad for a book where God's name is not mentioned, not even once. You know, there are times where you see, wow, when there's favor, and we find favor with men, favor with people, how doors of opportunity are just opened. But it wasn't just Esther's physical beauty that brought her the attention of the Persian royal court, though it may have opened a door. It was her character that made a difference. Sometimes we may feel like, well, you know, life favors those who possess attractive qualities or exceptional talents and abilities, but many will fail to recognize the one who has opened that door and for what purpose. See, favor with people has no lasting purpose unless it is used for the glory of God. Favor with people has no lasting purpose unless it is used for the glory of God. Esther would learn that her position of privilege would also call her to responsibility. Even those of us who live mere ordinary lives answer to God for the opportunities, the advantages, the privileges that we have been given. It's what so many of us are learning. Our influence may not reach as far as Esther's, but we face the same choice that she did. What will we do with the life that we have been given? What will we do? Exiled God's people may have felt among the weakest members of society. Weakest of all would have been a young orphan girl, a girl of Jewish descent. But you know, in the Bible, God uses the most unlikely characters to fulfill his purposes. He elevates a Jewish orphan to queen of a great empire. And in this book, he works through those that know, and you know, he'll even work through those who don't know him. You may wonder, could God work in and through you despite your imperfections? Can he work through our shortcomings, our lack of talent, our weaknesses, lack of influence? The answer is absolutely. He isn't looking for perfect, for talented, or even influential people. He is looking for people who are willing. He is looking for people who are willing and who will work for his glory. Are you willing? Are you willing? Is Esther willing? Was she willing? Stay tuned for next week's chapters. Thank you.